The moment she refused to shrink. Jasmine Crockett's unforgettable interview. The laughter was steady in the studio that night. That practiced, almost choreographed kind that fills late-night TV sets. Stephen Colbert leaned forward behind his desk, that signature sparkle in his eye as the cameras panned to the side entrance. And then she walked in. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped into the spotlight wearing a deep blue blazer, tailored just enough to say, "I came to talk," but not, "I came to play." The audience applauded warmly as she took her seat across from Colbert. Congresswoman Crockett. Colbert began with a grin. "Texas heat treating you all right up here in Manhattan?" Jasmine smirked. "Compared to Texas politics, this is air conditioning." The audience laughed. It was off to a good start. For the first few minutes, the banter flowed smoothly. They discussed voting rights, long congressional sessions, and the challenge of keeping people engaged in a political system that often feels rigged. Crockett answered each question directly, but with personality. You could tell she wasn't there to play a role. She was present. Present in a way that made it clear she knew her words could be clipped, posted, and weaponized within minutes. Still, she leaned in. Then Colbert shifted. He leaned back slightly, almost casually, and said, "You've been pretty vocal about some disagreements inside your own party. Would you say Democrats are more divided now than ever?" The question didn't come with a smirk. It was surgical, sharp. The studio got quiet. Not silent, just quiet enough that the tone shift was clear. Crockett didn't answer right away. She tilted her head slightly and gave Colbert that look, the one that says, "You want to go there?" "I think disagreement is healthy," she said slowly. "What's dangerous is when disagreement is packaged as dysfunction by folks who benefit from chaos." Colbert raised an eyebrow. "That chaos doesn't help your party, though. Some might say it makes you look weak." That word, weak, hit different. The audience didn't laugh. Crockett didn't blink. "Stephen," she said with that cool Texas drawl barely peeking through, "you ever seen a family argue in public? Doesn't mean they're weak. It means they care enough not to pretend." A few people clapped. One woman in the second row let out a sharp "em," like she just heard the gospel. But Colbert wasn't done. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I mean, that's generous, but are you sure it's not just ego?" There was a slight ripple in the air. Colbert had asked something that wasn't just about politics. It was about her. The crowd tensed. Even the camera operator's movement slowed. Everyone felt it. Jasmine didn't look away. She sat perfectly still, letting the word ego hang there like a dare. She looked at Colbert, steady, unshaken, then leaned slightly forward. "You know, Stephen, I get that this is your lane," poking the bear with a grin. "But let me ask you something." Her voice was calm, smooth, not a trace of anger. "When you disagree with your writing team backstage, does that mean you think they're beneath you? Or does it mean you care enough to push for better?" The audience reacted before Colbert could. Some clapped, a few whistled, and one guy let out a sharp, "Whoa." Colbert chuckled, scratching his chin. "Okay, fair. Touché." But Crockett wasn't done. She smiled politely, a smile with edges. "We argue in the open because we don't get to argue in private. That's the difference. If I'm fighting for clean water or basic voting rights, and another Democrat hesitates, you bet I'll say something. That's not ego. That's accountability." Her words weren't just sharp. They were surgical. Not a single wasted sentence. Colbert tried steering back toward humor. All right. We've got a congresswoman here with the clapback of the year. Remind me not to argue with you during sweeps week." Laughter. Relief. But the tension didn't fully dissipate. She turned to the audience, gesturing lightly. "I get it. This is entertainment. It's a late show. People tune in to laugh before bed. But for me, it doesn't end when the cameras go dark. People back in Dallas are counting on me to speak truth, even when it's not trending." The crowd applauded again, louder this time. Colbert took a breath, studying her, then casually. "Some people think you're a little too bold, too direct, even for your own party. Ever worry about being labeled difficult?" And there it was, the first real clash. The word that black women in power hear over and over. Difficult. Not brilliant. Not strategic. Not prepared. Just difficult. Crockett's face didn't change, but her tone dropped slightly. Not in volume, but in weight. "I think it's funny," she said, turning back to Colbert. "How bold turns into difficult, depending on who's speaking. A man interrupts. He's passionate. A woman speaks clearly. She's emotional. A black woman corrects someone. Suddenly, it's a problem." The audience hushed again. One person clapped, hesitated. Then others followed. "I don't lose sleep over labels," she continued. "But I do lose sleep when people who look like me are shut out of conversation because someone else didn't like their tone." Colbert nodded slowly. This wasn't the interview he expected, but he wasn't resisting it either. "Okay," he said, more thoughtful now. "Let's talk about tone then. Because when you went viral last month, that moment with Representative Downing, some folks said you were too aggressive, that you cross a line." Crockett tilted her head. "Did I use profanity? No. Did I threaten anyone? No. Did I call anyone out of their name? No." She sat back. "Then what line did I cross, Stephen? The one that says I should have smiled while being talked over." That hit hard. The kind of applause that says, "She's right," and we know it rippled through the audience. Colbert leaned back, arms crossed now, processing in real time. "You're saying the line was invisible, but you were supposed to see it anyway." "Exactly," she said. But just when it felt like Crockett had landed the final punch, the real moment was still waiting to happen. Colbert sat quiet for a moment, not frozen, just still. His smile had faded, but not from offense. More like recognition that this wasn't going to be one of those interviews where he could toss out barbs and skate on charm. He cleared his throat. "Okay, so let's say you've got a point. But don't you think that at some level public figures, especially elected ones, have to play the game, even if it's a little rigged?" That was it. Crockett didn't flinch, didn't blink. She folded her hands in her lap, glanced out at the crowd, and then calmly turned back toward Colbert. "Stephen," she said, voice low but sharp, "you ever ask yourself why the game's rigged in the first place?" Colbert tried to jump in, just a word or two, but she held her space. "Because the people who built it never expected folks like me to be playing," she continued, "let alone winning." That line cracked the silence. Someone gasped audibly. Another person shouted, "Say that!" And then the applause, not trailing off but building, like it started from a place deeper than agreement. Recognition. Relief. Respect. Colbert chuckled lightly, trying to find the moment again. "All right, that was solid, but you got to admit that sounded rehearsed." Crockett grinned. Not wide, just enough to let you know she saw what he was doing. "Oh, it's not rehearsed. It's repeated because I have to say it every time someone tells me I'm too much." She leaned forward slightly, hands still clasped. "Too much truth, too much volume, too much nerve, too much presence." The room was still. This wasn't a rant. It wasn't even defensive. It was clinical, like watching someone cut through layers with absolute precision. Colbert raised his hand slightly. "Okay, but let me push back." "You've been pushing the whole time," she said, interrupting for first time. Her voice didn't rise, but it was firmer now, "and I'm still standing." That's when it happened. The crowd went completely silent. No reaction, no music sting, nothing. For a full beat, it was dead quiet. Everyone in the room felt it. Even Colbert did. You could see it in his face. Impact! He leaned back slowly, shook his head like he'd just been knocked back by something he didn't see coming. Then the applause erupted. Loud, messy, people standing up without thinking about it. The kind of reaction that live TV producers both pray for and fear, because it's real, raw, unscripted. Colbert just sat there for a second looking at her, then let out a deep, genuine laugh. "Damn," he said, almost under his breath. "That's going to be on TikTok before I get off the stage." Crockett smiled again, still not big, still not gloating, just steady. He pointed at her. "I've had senators on this couch, governors, even a president once. But you brought something different." She shrugged lightly. "I brought honesty." A beat passed. Then Colbert looked at the camera and muttered, "Can we even follow that with a musical guest?" Everyone laughed again, but differently this time. Not because of a joke, but because they'd all just witnessed something real. Colbert turned back to her one last time. "You know what? Let's forget the rest of these cards," he said, flipping his cue cards aside. "Let's just talk." But what no one realized yet was that this exchange wouldn't stay in that room. It was already halfway across the internet before the credits rolled. By morning, the clip was the #1 trending video on YouTube's homepage. 8 million views on the show's YouTube channel, 1.6 million on Crockett's Instagram. Hashtags have been trending for 5 hours straight. Some headlines praise her as a rising political star with grit and grace. Others question whether she was grandstanding. But it wasn't just journalists weighing in. It was regular people. Teachers, nurses, truck drivers. Single moms were filling her inbox. One message read, "I've never voted before, but you made me feel like my voice matters." Another, "I'm a black woman in a white boardroom. You said everything I've never been allowed to say out loud." There were thousands like that, of course. There were also the trolls, sending threats and posting edited clips to distort her words. She didn't respond to any of them. Instead, she opened a message from an older woman in Tulsa who wrote, "I'm 68 years old. Watched that segment twice. First time I cheered. Second time I cried. Not because you were loud, but because you were clear." That one she saved. 3 days after the interview aired, Jasmine sat across from journalist Celeste reading in a quiet studio in Baltimore. No audience, no band, no applause signs. Just 2 chairs, microphones, and the kind of silence that invites honesty. Celeste didn't waste time. "When you walked into Colbert's studio, did you expect it to become a national flashpoint?" "No," Jasmine replied without hesitation. "I expected to be interrupted. I expected to be underestimated. I didn't expect people to care this much." "So, what do you think they saw in you?" Jasmine paused. Someone who didn't flinch. She meant it, not with arrogance, but with clarity, because for years she'd been preparing for moments like that without knowing when they'd come. Town halls where people talked over her. Debates where moderators barely looked in her direction. Committee hearings where male colleagues explained bills she'd co-written as if she were a visitor, not a lawmaker. The Colbert interview hadn't been a trap. Not really, but it had become a test. And not just for her, but for everyone watching. A test of how we respond when a woman refuses to shrink, refuses to smile through disrespect, refuses to soften her voice just to be heard. "You said something in the interview that stuck with people," Celeste noted. "You've been pushing the whole time, and I'm still standing." Where did that come from? Jasmine exhaled. "Honestly, I didn't plan to say that. It just came out because it's true. That's not just a TV moment. That's my life." And that was the truth of it. That moment wasn't a line for applause. It was a sentence formed by years of experience, of being pushed and still standing. The viral moment faded as viral moments do. New headlines came. New controversies took over the timeline. The internet moved on. But not everyone did. For weeks after, Jasmine Crockett's inbox stayed full. Not with media inquiries or political strategists, but with people. Everyday people who didn't care about polls or approval ratings. They cared about how they saw themselves in her. A teenage girl in Spokane who had spoken up at a school board meeting for the first time. A single father in Tucson who said watching Crockett hold her ground helped him walk into a custody hearing with his shoulders back. A nurse from Bakersfield who kept the video bookmarked on her phone for days when she needed a reminder to speak up at staff meetings. It was never about celebrity. It was about recognition. Because the power of that moment between a polished host and an unshakably present guest was in how familiar it felt. Anyone who's ever been dismissed, talked over, or underestimated felt it in their chest. Weeks later, during a community event at a library in Little Rock, a woman in her 60s approached Jasmine quietly. No fanfare, just walked up, looked her in the eye, and said, "That one moment made me forgive myself for all the times I stayed quiet." Crockett didn't know what to say, so she just reached out and held the woman's hand. That was the legacy of what happened on that stage. Not internet fame, not interviews, not hashtags. It was that someone somewhere learned to stop apologizing for their presence. It reminded people that it's okay to take up space and not shrink yourself to be digestible for someone else's comfort. That grace and strength are not opposites. And that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is not raising your voice, but refusing to lower your standards. It reminded us that you don't have to wait for permission to be heard. You don't need perfect conditions or a carefully scripted response. You just need to know why you're speaking and stand firm when the spotlight turns. And maybe the biggest message, you don't have to match someone's tone to match their power. Crockett didn't beat Colbert at his own game. She didn't play it at all. She brought her own. So if there's one thing to take from all of it, from the questions, the comebacks, the noise, and the clarity, it's this. You don't have to be loud to be strong. But when you are strong, people will hear you loud and clear. If this story moved you, take a second to think about where you've been holding back, whose game you've been trying to play, and ask yourself, what might happen if you brought your own?